Thank you, Carla, and thank you everyone again for joining us. It is again a pleasure to host this from Homegrown. We welcome you and we welcome Elliot Haspel, author of Raising a Nation, his most recent book. As I mentioned at the beginning, we have had already our first session of our book club in which we discussed the first three chapters. Now we are going to discuss the next three chapters, and we will open some opportunity for us to interact. Since we have like a relatively limited time, and if you want to introduce yourself, you can do it via the chat, so everyone can say hi there. But other than that, yeah, this is a space for us to interact later. We will hear from Elliot. So Elliot, welcome, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Rafael, and thank you to Homegrown, and thank you to Carla for all of the help in setting this up and the opportunity to be with you all. Thank you for taking some time out of your week to talk about childcare and the cases there of it. So, what I want to do with this time is similar to what we did in the first one, if you were there, which is I'm going to go through, each of the three cases kind of one at a time that we're talking about today, give a little bit of color and context around it, and then I have some questions that I've developed, and because we were in a meeting room this time, we're gonna do some breakout rooms so you can talk with one another, process some of these questions, then come back. We'll do a little bit of whole group conversation, and then we'll move on to the second, the cases we're talking about today. Do the same thing. So at the very end, if there's time, we'll leave some space for questions and answers. So the first of the three cases we're talking about today is the patriotic case, and I'll be really honest. This was not the one I was most comfortable writing, and the one that I think I learned maybe myself the most in writing. And one thing that I learned that was fascinating was his history of American thought around parenting as a public service. And yes, please do introduce yourselves in the chat. It'd be great to know who all is here. And this, we know, it traces back to really the turn of the 20th century. I quote, and we're going to talk about Teddy Roosevelt, kind of speech he was giving to the National Congress of Mothers, but it was not just the president. There were social reformers. There were many women's groups, and a lot of them were making these cases that the reason that government should get involved in helping parents, and in this case it was mostly mothers, had to do with the fact that parenting was contributing to society. And the reason I say that it was like uncomfortable is because at the time it was also very wrapped up in both reductive views of gender, right? So in many cases, I find when reading statements from that time period that it was you sort of reducing women's value to their reproductive abilities, since that wasn't good. There were many cases there was this idea of we want to be producing more children. When we say it's for the public good, it's because we need to strengthen the society because we might need to go to war and we need like bodies that we can go to war with. And this is something that, and it became very ugly, this line of thought around sort of how parents and the state interact, particularly when you got into places like fascist Italy and fascist Germany. So it's a highly problematic line of thought, and it is this interesting case that when we in modern times treat parenting as this entirely individual exercise where there is no contribution to society and society doesn't owe parents anything, it becomes harder to argue for why there should be large-scale public investments in childcare. And indeed, over the past 20 or 30 years, there's been an emerging line of thought coming in some cases from feminist economists like Nancy Fulbright saying, again, particularly in the modern economy, where most people are not living on farms, where the labor of our children is like going back into our own subsistence. Like our children are by and large going out into the world and they are contributing to society and the roles that they're playing. They're paying taxes into, social insurance programs like Social Security and Medicare that did not exist at the turn of the 20th century. And so more and more, actually, society owes parents something because of how much they're contributing via parenting. So I thought that was a really sort of interesting and challenging line of thought, but I think there's potentially a cutting edge to it if we can get around all of the problematic kind of underpinnings and pick out the pieces that and update the pieces that work today. The other part of the patriotic case that I think is really important is when you think about the children themselves who are going to grow up to be citizens, who are citizens, but who are going to grow up to be voting, citizens, and they're going to be engaging civically with one another, and they're going to be influencing public opinion, and they're going to be influencing their elected leaders. And so there's this question of, from the standpoint of democracy, which is obviously a very live topic these days, what does it mean to have children having strong early childhood experiences where they're starting to engage in what I term civic readiness alongside their school readiness? And similarly, with representation of adults, we know that mothers of young children in particular are drastically underrepresented in elected office. And one of the reasons for that is because they don't have access to childcare that they need, either to be able to stay rooted in a community, which you need to do if you're going to run for office, or the very practical realities of running for office. I briefly served on the board of an organization called Vote Mama, which is a nonprofit that has been doing work around the country, getting states and state courts to say that childcare expenditures is a legitimate usage of campaign funds. Prior to that work, in almost every state in the country, it was not an acceptable usage of campaign funds, and so it's interesting how modern, like how truly over the past few years, we're starting to see those sorts of shifts. So I think whether it's from the more fundamental case around parenting as a public service, whether it's around a case that if we want a strong democracy in the here and now in terms of representation, and also in the future in terms of the children who are growing up, we need to really lean into childcare. So I think that's when I thought of the patriotic case. I wrapped up those thoughts. So, Raphael, if we can pull up the slide, I've got a slide with some questions for you all. So we're going to talk in groups about the first question, which, and I'm curious for you all to wrestle with this, because like I said, I had to wrestle with this. So what do you make of Theodore Roosevelt's assertion back in 1908 that the mother is a better citizen even than the soldier who fights for their country? And are there ways that this concept of parenthood as public service can be updated for the modern era in a way that is useful, or is it just so problematic and wrapped up in so many issues that we shouldn't even bother trying to sort of resurrect that line of argumentation? I don't think there's a right answer or wrong answer. The goal here is to give you all a chance to wrestle with it. So, Karen, if you want to open the breakout rooms, we're going to spend about 8 or 10 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then we'll bring it back and hear a few people share out, and then we'll move on to chapter 5.
Okay, great. We are going to have 3 breakout rooms. Since we can't have interpretation in every room, we're going to divide them up into English speaking room 1. If your first name starts with the letters A through K, please go to, and you speak English, please go to room 1. English speaking room 2 is if your first name starts with the letters L through Z, and you speak English, and then we'll have a third room that is for our Spanish speakers. So we'll open the rooms and let you go ahead and select the one that is appropriate for you. And we'll be back in 10 minutes, Elliot. 10.
Yep, we can send a message, but let's plan to be back, around 12, say 25.
Sounds good.
I hope that was a good conversation. I would love just to hear, maybe one person from each group share out, and then we'll move on to the next case. I want to make sure we have enough time for the other two. So, could someone from group 1, the brave soul, share a little bit about your conversation and some of the takeaways? You can just come off mute, talk. I was a teacher. I can wait.
It was a great conversation. A lot of agreement about, uh, how this concept really needs to be modernized because parenting has significantly changed. And even in the advocacy work, we're seeing much more success with younger legislators, and younger men are more involved in their families, which is a welcome change. And talked a little bit about pulling in you know, the the idea that childcare is also part of the economic infrastructure and making that case that that's what unlocks workforce participation. So I think the consensus was we really want people to do it because it's the right thing to do. And, you still want to get there however you can get there.
Great, thank you. How about from group two?
We unfortunately didn't have much of a conversation because there was a big communication issue.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear
Um,
that.
but one of the things that we did mention is that the last question that you had about how do we apply it in the modern era? And um, I just said that was a huge question for me. And basically it's we need to advocate. And I wanted to go on further and say that we need to change the language. People
Mm.
need to, have better language, and then they understand what better.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think that's absolutely right. And I think these are the types of conversations and hopefully keep having them, outside of rooms like this, that we need to figure out what's the language that's gonna resonate. Cool. All right, well then let's shift gears and talk about the next chapter, which was the parenthood and childhood case. And this one, I really wanted to emphasize the ways that the child care influenced the actual like day-to-day experience of being a kid in America and being a parent in America. So I think oftentimes we can get, I mean, obviously these cases, and to the point that we are just talking about, you gotta get there how you get there. But a lot of the cases that we tend to make for childcare rely sort of on this. I talk about in the book as the investable child, right? The idea of like the child is valuable insofar as 18 plus years down the road, they're going to be in the workforce. They're going to be, even in this last case, they're going to be voters. And we don't spend as much time, I think, focusing in on this. It's like, what should it be like to be a kid in America in the 2020s? What should it be like to be a parent in America? And in a lot of ways, childcare defines the contours of those experiences, both in the stresses that they can cause and this idea of intensive parenting. I think I would always enjoyed the research paper that they called it the rugrat race. Is that phrase has always stuck with me. And this idea, there's just another piece, if even, and it's not just like something even among folks who don't have as many financial means. There was just a piece yesterday, I think, in the New York Magazine. See if I can find it when you are on the breakouts for this one, about the like elite preschools and kindergartens in New York City and all the way that like wealthy, New York families are like falling over themselves trying to get their kids into these like elite preschools because they're like they somehow that's going to define, their lives. That's not a healthy sort of ecosystem in my view. Yes, exactly. And so I think being able to make those cases can really help because I will tell you, in my experience and in my work, like there are certainly a subset of parents who look at kind of that rugrat race, who look at things like early childhood education. And they say that does not resonate with what I want my kid's life to be. That feels like you're trying to start school when they're 2 years old. Like, I don't want anything to do with that. Like, they should be in like a more home-based setting, right? They should be spending more time just being kids. And so it can actively work against our efforts, I think. So being able to make the case that actually, if you want to be, parenting should not be this hard, and it is far too hard right now. And if you want to tamp down the difficulty level of parenting and also help the experience of kids being kids, then you do need a strong childcare system because it defines again so much of family finances. It defines so much of that day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month experience of who is spending time with the kids, and are you able to have the quality time that you want with your own children, share your own stories, and make those memories. So, Raphael, if you want to pop the questions back up. Okay. And then the one other piece I wanted to mention on this too before I let y'all go is I think that in this case is where I chose to emphasize this idea that I think it's uh, unwise to cut off the childcare conversation at age 5. I understand why we do that. Early childhood is a distinct developmental period, although that developmental period goes up closer to 7 and 8. But there's also this situation where half of families in America who have a young kid, who have a kid under the age of 5, also have a kid who's in school. So first of all, like half of the early childhood constituency has a school-aged kid. Second of all, because of the way family units work, if you help solve early child care, but you haven't done anything for after school or summer, that's still an enormous stressor on families. And third of all, there are just a massive constituency of parents of school-aged kids that is much larger and arguably less exhausted than the constituency of parents who have very young kids. And so one of my arguments in that case is that also we should, this is the one I wanted to kind of poke on with you all, is I make an argument that we should connect early care and school-aged care and talk about childhood more broadly, talk about parenting more broadly, rather than carving it up into sort of age bands as much as we do today, though I understand why we've gotten to where we are. So I'm curious what you think about that, because I'm not entirely convinced I'm right. And I want to hear your thoughts. So we're going to send you into breakouts. Karen, are you going to the same breakouts? We want to change it up in which ones we're doing?
I think we can stick with room 1 and 2 so far. And then Noreen, let's try to troubleshoot here in the main room before you head into your breakout. But so this should send you back into your same groups. We'll open those up.
All right. And we'll do like a little bit shorter for this one. Let's do like 7 minutes. We'll come back here at 12:40 or 12:40 Mountain, whatever time it is for you.
Okay, sounds good. So just find that blue button, click the join button.
Welcome back. All right. So same deal. I'd love to hear kind of and maybe someone different this time from each group wants to give a quick summary. And let's start with group 2 this time. So group 2, give a quick sort of share out of what you all talked about.
Who's group 2? I don't even know what group I am.
Yeah, you're group 2, I think, Noreen. What do y'all talk about?
Okay, well, me and my new friend, my 2 new friends, she was actually, well, what she was expressing was that she does see that there wasn't no connection between the parents and the schools. And then I was expressing to her that I am a family child care provider. And on this block, I've established it where all 12 houses, we're all child care providers, but we run schools out of our residential home. And doing so, I was able to empower the mothers that participated with me to run schools out of their residential home to empower the parents. So now in our area where I'm from, which is the Los Angeles South Central area in California, we've gotten where we can oppose to pick and choose who we want to be that principal in that school setting, because they know we're hitting hard. And we're hitting hard for the fact that we allow mothers to understand you got a voice and you have power. So let's start expediting and using it. But it came from the family child care providers in home. So I don't know if I'm kind of but it's going to go on for a lifetime because we already done planted the seed. So I do see it now. We see the change. And if they do see me opposed to make any appearance at their facility, it's like, no, it's her. She knows what she's talking about, and she's going to empower these parents. So when they have their meetings, I'm sitting right there with the parents to allow them to know, no, you speak and you find out all of what you need to find out, and you're not just issued a flyer, or you're not just issued some information that you don't even know how to expedite.
Yeah. Thank you, Noreen. I appreciate that. All right, group one. Group one. So it was brave last time. Someone else, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What y'all talk about?
Look like me and you gonna be the only two talking.
No, we get some of that.
Group one, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a lot about the need for school age care and just how much, and like you talked about before, we forget about that continuum. You know, I see it from the lens that I work at a child care resource and referral network, and we look at the numbers. We actually, a third of our referrals are to school age care. Done a lot of advocacy over the years I was on the board of the New York State Network for Youth Success, which is our after school network. So seeing the importance, and especially here in New York, as we're talking about universal care, where are all those kids going to go after it? You know, full day is not really going to be full day. They're going to need those after school programs. So we talked about that. And then another member of our group was talking about the supports that her organization provides to parents as they're early on, like even as they're getting ready to have children, but you know, just in the early years, and just providing for being a parent. And we just need to think about it more holistically as we raise a child, that they're not, you know, they just need a lot of support. It's hard to be a parent.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you. Well, I agree, and I think that the more we can talk about those two things together, the better off it'll be. So we're gonna move to the last case, and given time, because we could talk about this for hours, and I appreciate that. I think we're just gonna stay as a whole group. So the last case we're gonna talk about today was the racial and gender equity case. And in some ways, if the patriotic case was one of the hardest to write, this was one of the easiest to write. Because I think for me personally, it is so blindingly clear how much, if we want to have racial and gender equity in this country, we've got to strengthen our childcare system, and that goes back to its very, very racist origins and very sexist origins. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time remaking that case for you all. But I would say in the questions, Raphael, if you want to pull them up, that I wanted to talk about here were sort of two different pieces of that case. One is, I think there's a way to leverage the racial and gender equity lens to actually build sort of solidarity, because a lot of times that's not always been the case. And I talk about some of the history in the book where early in the child care movement, like in the 20th century, early 20th century, in some cases, the kind of white-led movements for women's groups and white-led movements for day nurseries excluded people of color, and especially Black women, from participating. I think that similarly, we've obviously seen a slight recent uptick in dads getting involved in childcare movement, and things like the Congressional Dads Caucus. All of that is truly new as of the 2020s in a lot of ways. So, like, one sort of point I want to kind of think about is, like, are there ways to come in through the gender and racial equity lens to build a broader base of support than we might otherwise have? And the other piece of that is, I think, particularly for gender equity, is thinking about the group of the stay-at-home parents. And I'm curious to hear, if you all talk about that population in your work. Obviously, it's overwhelmingly women still who are stay-at-home parents, about 80%, 80, 85%, 75, 80%. And, in a lot of cases, as I can lay out in the book, that population is struggling. They don't have opportunities either to, if they are stay-at-home parent, because that is a deeply held belief in what they deeply want to do. They're isolated and in many cases struggling financially. A third of stay-at-home parents live below the poverty line. About half of them are people of color. About a third of them are immigrants. So it's not kind of this, I think, traditional, like, kind of the stereotype they get sometimes. And then there are lots of stay-at-home parents who are stay-at-home parents because the cost of childcare is taking away legitimate options to work outside the home and pursue other kinds of careers that they might want to. So I would be curious how either of these questions you want to tackle here, either thinking about how we can build a broader movement by leaning on equity cases, or thinking about, should stay-at-home parents be part of this conversation as well?
I will put the questions in the chat for reference.
Yep. We'll open that up for anyone. So you can just come off mute.
And what is your question you're asking again? I'm sorry.
Two questions. Either a question about how making the case that childcare improves racial and gender equity, how can that help build a broader movement? Or the other question is, how do we think about stay-at-home parents in making the case?
Well, I'm coming in from a child care perspective view. Years ago, I've been in the business for 25 plus years, and I was always mothers dropping the children off and picking the children up. But now that has came dramatically. It's a change now. Now I see probably if two mothers and the rest of them is all fathers. So we just started to hopefully, my suggestion is create something where you put them first, more so than you just continuously putting the mothers or parents. Try to address it where the men are getting more of the awareness that they matter as well. You know, here we give a father's dance. We have, just certain little things to let them know we have a father's dinner where we allow them to know that they're important because they're the ones that's doing most of the dropping off and picking up. Mothers nowadays, as we can see, women, not in a real crucial way, but women ruling everything. The women are more with the jobs and the men are not. So that's what I'm actually seeing in the child care. This is what I'm visualizing in the child care, that the women are working more now and the men's are getting less. They're getting less, they don't have the jobs. So they have to be the one that the mothers rely on and count on. And the fathers are now used to be where the mothers were single moms and they were taking care of the children. Now the mamas is giving the babies to the daddies. And like y'all figure it out now. So a lot of that is changed. I don't know if that's in other states, countries, but right here where I'm coming from, it's more dads that are dropping off and picking up children.
That's good. I think that's an asset to the movement, right? If we can lean on that. Not that I always say, as a man in this work, like it's not like the men finally showed up and so to save the day. It's that the men finally woke up and got off the sidelines and joined the fray. Great, thanks, Noreen. I think we have one or two more thoughts on this. I'm curious about the stay-at-home parents one. Do you talk about stay-at-home parents in your work? How do you all think about that population?
I was talking about that earlier to the women that I was in the group with. And on my block, like I expressed earlier, it's 12 houses on this block, and all 12 of us are stay-home moms. And I did it to actually show we can make a difference. One of the women next door, her son's a doctor next door to me. The two ladies across the street, they have their own firm, but it's because we were stay-home moms, we were able to meet recitals and able to go to parent conferences, and we wasn't overwhelmed with our jobs and staying home and educating our children. We was able to walk with them through the path of them being educated and growing up to be productive individuals. And this is right out of South Central Los Angeles. So to get this kind of return, and college graduates, no dropouts, no drug heads, none of that. None of that. Everything on this block is productive. But it was that right there was a scene. If that right there prove what you're trying to express, if they did take on the initiative, and then it's cheaper, it's more and more affordable if you just stayed home and watch them than to trying to take half of your income wages and pay for childcare. Who gains? No one.
Great. Anyone else? I'd love to hear it. I want to make sure we get enough airtime for other folks. So anyone who hasn't gotten a chance to share yet, any thoughts about this?
Jordan made some notes on the chat. I don't know if you want to look at that.
Oh yeah. Where dad's picking up. Yep. Yeah, I mean that's a good point. Just because we're seeing them doesn't necessarily mean it's they're providing more care, which is the convenience. I do think that yes, we definitely see some evidence in the surveys that fathers are more involved, and I see that too in my work. And also, right, that's not it's still overwhelmingly, women who are doing the work, who are the childcare providers. Um, but it is changing. I think we're up to about a fifth of stay-at-home parents are dads nowadays, which was much, much, much lower even 20 years ago. But that still means that 80% are women, so moms.
And I wanted to add to that,
Please.
Elliot, if I may. Actually, I know what Jordan is referring to because I found myself doing that 30 years ago. My two
Mm.
boys, my husband and I, we moved into a area, and I'm from California. I moved to North Carolina a couple years ago, but back in the day, my husband and I had no choice. He had to work graveyard hours, and I took the day shift, and that is how we were able to manage through, you know, through the elementary years up to the high school years, and we made it. But it was not that it was just him and I. There was sometimes times that we had to lean on even people that were around us, even to the point that if we either one of us could not pick up our child, from school for whatever the reasons may have been, we still had to rely on someone nearby us, whether it was a friend,
Hmm.
a neighbor, to help us be able to pick them up, or at least have them until we got out of work or something, because the need was starting to be seen a lot more then. Going back to today, as of today, I do see that happening again. And because of the families that I work with, either the mom or dad have had to give up their careers to be able to stay with their child, and or they have had to make the choice of either the father or the mother have to work graveyard and day just to make you know everything, the means and the necessities made at home. But again, I don't think and I don't believe that that's the way it should be. Families shouldn't have to make a decision whether they should or can't have children because this is an issue, this is a problem. And I know some of us are very fortunate we could have that village around us by our families, but there's some that, you know, they have to move to a new location because their company is giving them this opportunity. And in that location, there's no one as far as family or friends or someone that they can trust, or maybe childcare is not available. And it's just the list just adds on and on top of that situation. So,
I appreciate that. Thank you, Elena. And yeah, I would say on the I think great points in the chat, right? Like you have paid family leave plays into this, the family, friend, and neighbor care, right? Like this new village idea. I'll also mention it is my work at my think tank Capita. We just recently put out a publication on stay-at-home parents. And yeah, it's a very diverse group in a lot of different ways. So I think this all gets at this question, I will say, for the purpose of the book of like, as we talk about childcare, let's talk about it in ways that are inclusive and comprehensive, right? And that so everyone can see themselves in the story. I think sometimes when we talk about it too much, it feels like just about licensed care, or there are some people in this work who do too much just about people staying home with their kids, and we kind of miss the variety and the dynamism, I think, of what parenting is really like and what parents really want. So I think that's um, yeah, and that's a great point there too, Jordan. How we talk about the child development, right? Because we've lost in a lot of ways the child from the childcare conversation, which is a whole nother thing we could talk about. But I think these are all really great points. I really want to respect everyone's time. So I really appreciate the thing I'll leave you with is the same thing I left you all with last time. Is think about like, is there like just someone in your work or in your network or in your life that you want to try out one of these cases on? Is there some words you want to tweak? Is there a document you're working on that you want to try to layer in one of these cases? And to see how it goes, right? I think I forget who said it earlier, but the language we use matters and shapes how people think about issues like childcare. So let's try some different language and see how it goes. So I hope to see you all at the next one. I'll pass it over to Raphael, and then yeah, we're gonna have one more of these coming up.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elliot, and thanks, Jordan, for putting all your thoughts there. I know you had issues with the mute button, so we still appreciate that you share your perspectives there in the chat. And as Elliot mentioned, we will have one more session for this book club. It is a really great experience to put this together, and we really appreciate your participation. And this makes the conversation on childcare like really rich, and it's like an honor for Homegrown to host this. Thank you, Elliot, and everyone for participating. And please check your emails. We will be sending some information about the next and last session of Raising a Nation. So thank you so much, and thank you, Elliot.
Thank
Have a
you all.
great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.